more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is Positive Talk Radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm so grateful that you're joining us today. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA. And if you haven't been listening regularly, I invite you to go to the website livingyourinspiredlife.org and check out what we've been doing over the last couple of years. We have amazing conversations. They're inspiring, thought-provoking, and there's actually a little bit of homework you can do or a meditation you can drop into if you go to the website. So it's livingyourinspiredlife.org, and just tune in and tune up to develop your power perspective. So today I am also, again, just moved by gratitude for this author who is calling in from London. I want to welcome the author of The Transcendent Mind, The Missing Piece in Emotional Wellbeing. Welcome, Sunita Pattani.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. I have been perusing your book, and The Transcendent Mind, and you're just so people know, you have studied a plethora of stuff besides being a psychotherapist. You've studied the Course in Miracles, and you've studied all sorts of world religions, including the Gita. And then you brought in your book, you brought in near-death experiences and quantum physics. It's just a really fun read. It was for me, at least. And so I want to ask you, before we drop into the whole thing about the book, why were you led to, on your own personal quest of all of those different modalities, if you will?
Absolutely. I think there comes a time in many people's lives, actually, Susan, when we experience, the dark night of the soul, where life doesn't work out the way that we sometimes envisage it to happen. And actually, my journey started from fairly a young age. I think I was 19 when I first sort of came across the idea of, spirituality, or there's more to us that meets the eye. And then it wasn't really until my mid-20s that, life sort of brought me down to my knees, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that's really when all of my issues came up, the sort of lack of self-worth, and really when I started to question, who am I? And as I started to work on my own sort of personal journey, what I'd been interested in, and really looking closely at who I was drawn to study psychotherapy because, of course, before I was a psychotherapist, I was actually a primary school teacher, so it's quite different.
Yeah.
So I was drawn to study psychotherapy, but to be honest, Susan, when I started to study it, I still felt as if there was something missing. It was I was brilliant. I was learning about the mind, and I was learning about how the mind-body interacts together. But what I wasn't learning was, who am I at the very core? Something just seemed to be missing. And that's really when I started to just, actually, out of pure interest, started to look at, I started off with A Course in Miracles. I was also fairly familiar with the Bhagavad Gita. My husband is Hindu by faith, so I was already quite familiar with the spiritual text, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And, slowly there was this idea emerging that there was this unified consciousness, this one mind, this unified mind, transcendent mind is what I call it. And then I started asking the question, well, isn't that interesting? Where would I go to validate this? I mean, it sounds amazing. And at the time, I hadn't had personal experience of it, so to speak. And that's really where the journey to near-death experiences started, where I started looking for literature that would help to validate what it was that I was reading in the spiritual text. And hence, I decided to take a multidisciplinary approach of who we are as human beings.
And this approach personally, I enjoy, because I think that that we are such multifaceted beings anyway, that there isn't one modality. There's not a one size fits all of anything.
Exactly. Yes, absolutely.
So you asked the question toward the beginning of your book about, does psychotherapy really heal people? And my question is, or do we need a more integrated and holistic approach? And that's kind of what you've addressed in this book, The Transcendent Mind.
Yeah, I mean, when I talk about psychotherapy, and I try to make this clear when I speak to people, that I'm talking very much about the traditional psychotherapeutic approach, that looks at us just as the mind. And I often say to people, look, there's a place for everything when it comes to emotional healing, in my opinion. So I'm not saying that traditional psychotherapy doesn't work. There is a place for it. And in fact, it's been essential in the journey to understanding ourselves over the years as we've developed, But where we are today, I do feel that we do need more of an integrated approach. And of course, I do also see elements of this when you're looking at transpersonal psychotherapy now. You're looking at the dialectical behavioral therapy, for example. We're beginning to see elements of holistic healing being brought into, a conventional therapeutic setting.
I've had some experience with with the psychotherapy side of it too. I mean, being I was going to say victim. That's not what I mean. I mean, being a client, and I found, for me personally, it takes a whole bunch of other modalities besides that safe place of being able to talk about my stuff. It also helps to have a spiritual practice, if you will, a meditative or a stress reducing silence or mindfulness practice to integrate everything that I was learning about myself.
Absolutely. And, Susan, I would really agree with you there, because I think the first thing that I always tend to think when I work with people is, where are you as a person? And you're quite right. It's not a case of that a one size fits all,
Yeah.
So I tend to look at people and I tend to say, where are you as a person, first of all? What is it that you feel that you need? And, like I say, that there's a place for talking, there's a place for exploring your feelings. But, Susan, I think there's a place beyond that as well. There's a place where we learn how to relax, where we learn how to connect to a deeper being, where we learn that there may be more to us that meets the eye. So I personally feel that psychotherapy, for me anyway, is a combination of sort of traditional techniques, which is very person-centered, listening to the person, exploring their past, looking at behavior modification techniques, but then also having a look at the bigger picture, which is, well, who are we and how can we begin to really get in touch with that part of us, and where can we go to learn more about that? I guess it's an expansion in awareness, so to speak.
Yeah, and I have a quote from your book. You say, deeper healing involves a transformation of perception.
Yeah.
And I so agree with you on that. It's not just about talking about your stuff and at some point the stuff is going to go away, but it's really developing that a deeper perception within myself that supported me in making changes. And it was all a shift in perception, how I was seeing the situation or the person or the relationship or myself. And that's what made the bigger difference for me.
Yes, and I would wholeheartedly, of course, agree with what you're saying, because that's what I consider emotional healing to be, a really deep shift in perception. And here's the thing that I think a lot of people sometimes don't realize is that it doesn't look the same for everybody, this deep shift in perception that happens. And I think quite often, we look around us and we sometimes look at people and they talk about how they've healed and how it's happened really quickly for them. But whereas there are lots of people out there where, it really takes time, Susan, that sometimes we can really try our best and we can really do, everything to the best of our ability. But the healing, the shift in perception, it takes its time. We don't have, I believe anyway, that we don't have conscious control over everything. Because if we did, emotional healing would be very, very quick, and people would be doing it very quickly.
Right, it'd be easy.
Yeah, we'd have a much better world. But I think the whole process, it's different, unique for every individual, and it takes time. I think there's a grace about it. There's a certain grace about the way that the healing occurs. But that's been my personal experience anyway. A real, deep shift in perception.
I want to ask you. So, what is we've tapped on it briefly, but what is your definition of the transcendent mind? What does that really mean to people that don't comprehend what that is?
Absolutely. Actually, before I actually tell you what my definition is, just to put it into context, Susan, to help listeners out there understand. So I talked about the idea of me really experiencing the dark night of my soul and questioning who I was at the very core. And at that point, as I started to read and research more about, who we were, I came across A Course in Miracles. And actually, I read something very, very profound in there that said that there was one mind. There was this one consciousness, one being, so to speak, which was actually split into many individual beings. So in essence, it was the one energy, but it was sort of expressed in individualized or localized little particles, which is us, and ideally that is really the idea of the transcendent mind, that there is one mind. There is a unified mind. We are all connected via this mind. Everything is this mind. We are individual as well as transcendent all at the same time. A bit of a paradox.
Yeah.
And, the best way that I can find to explain it quite often is using the example of an ocean. If you look at the whole of the ocean as being the transcendent mind. Now, if I take a droplet, Susan, from that ocean, the droplet still has the same qualities, the same traits. It is the ocean, but it is in a localized format, and I could take that anywhere. And that's very much likened to us as individuals and the transcendent mind. We both are the ocean, but at the same time, we're having an individual experience,
Yes, I hear you, and this speaks to your conversation in the book, The Transcendent Mind, of the interconnectedness of everything too, because it's not just us as individualized droplets, but it's also we are also interconnected to the rocks, right, and the plants and the animals and everything. Yes,
we are, and. Actually, when I went on to actually research this, so we touched briefly upon near-death experiences, but before I go there, in relation to what you're saying, one of the most fascinating case studies that I came across was by somebody called Dr. Cleve Baxter. I don't know whether you've heard of Dr. Baxter, but
no.
He now, remarkable, back in 1966, he actually... did a lot of work with polygraphs, which is, of course, the lie detector test.
Mm.
And it was, I think, February the 2nd, 1966, and he'd been working all night in his office. And around about 7 a.m. in the morning, he stopped for a cup of coffee. And he had a thought, just a random thought in his mind, that his secretary, actually, a few days prior, had brought a Dracaena plant from a local shop that had a sale on. And he wondered what would happen if he hooked up the lie detector test to the plant. So just as an experiment, he decided to do it, and the first amazing thing that he found was that when he hooked the plant up, the lie detector test up to the plant, there was a reading from the plant. There was a very slight reading. So that was the first thing that surprised him. And he played around a little bit. He tapped the leaf with a pen and nothing happened. He dipped it into his coffee and nothing happened. And at that point, he had a thought. He thought, I wonder what would happen if I took the box of matches from my secretary's drawer next door and burned the plant. And at that very moment, Susan, that he had the thought, the lie detector test, literally the reading went off the chart as if a human would, if a human would be in fear.
Oh, my goodness, I can feel that. Oh, my goodness.
Yes,
wow.
It's remarkable. Now, this is 1966. Now, it's amazing because the Cleve Baxter actually went on to replicate this over and over, and not only did he replicate this particular experiment, he actually went on to do testing with bacteria and yogurt and all sorts of different things. There was something interesting he discovered about plants, actually, that plants apparently attune to the environment around them. Sort of, I think, if I remember correctly, maybe 40 or 50 feet. I think it's around about that figure. So they attune to their environment, and even the humans around them. They build a relationship, you know.
Wow.
And so in one instance, he had sort of, you know, he'd gone away. He'd attuned, worked on building a relationship with these plants. And then he went away for a little while. And, you know, he set it up experimentally so that they could record what was happening to the plant as he was experiencing himself different emotions. You know, it was fascinating. So he went to a surprise party, for instance, and the minute the surprise was called out, the plant back home had picked that up at that very moment.
Wow.
That there was an emotional change, you know. And then there was the one instance where the plant, there was bacteria in a sink, and there was hot water being poured down the sink, and the plant had responded in a very anxious, if we can call it that, you know, so to speak, manner, because it could feel that there was a life form that was being killed literally down the sink with boiling hot water. Phenomenal stuff, you know, so really beginning to highlight the idea that we seem to be connected at a very, very, very deep level, you know?
Well, so Sunita, I appreciate you explaining all that, because you know, I can feel like the web of life just encircling everything in the universe as you were describing that. But let's go back to the idea of the transcendent mind, which is the larger consciousness, the larger awareness, and then the idea of us human beings as individuals. Because I've often had this. Personally, this issue with spiritual-minded people that think that you have to completely disengage and cut out your ego in order to be a whole person. And you talk a little bit about that in your book, that the ego is part of what helps us to individuate.
Absolutely. I think, you know, the thing is, Susan, for me anyway, and I can only really speak from a personal experience here, that yes, we are part of a transcendent mind, and yes, the transcendent mind is everything and everywhere. But at the same time, I do think it's very important to be in the here and now as well, that actually we are individual beings. And right now, right here and now, we do have an ego, and it's not all negative, you know. I mean, the ego helps us to navigate our way, Susan, through life on this particular planet. You know, I mean, for example, I have read, just to put it into context, I have read case studies of sort of ancient seers in the past, sort of holy men, let's say, who have experienced instant enlightenment. Now, one of the things that had come up when I started looking at these cases was that when they experienced this instant enlightenment, the ego completely moved out of the way, and they actually found it very difficult to integrate into everyday normal life, you know?
Right.
So what I would say is, look, we're having a 3D human experience, I believe. And as long as we're on this planet, and as long as we have life breath within us, we are, I believe, working to enhance ourselves, become better versions of ourselves. Now, I don't think that's about clearing the ego out of the way and becoming, you know, just the transcendent mind or experiencing just that part. I believe that it's actually about accepting, you know, working and accepting and looking at what the ego is, the positives and the negatives, that actually wholeness isn't the absence of the ego. Wholeness is actually everything all in one, but you yourself recognizing that, okay, I have an ego and this is the way it's acting, but I don't like what it's doing, so I want to change it to become a better person. It's not about getting rid of it. It's about becoming more aware, recognizing what it's doing, appreciating that sometimes actually the ego can be a positive thing. Sometimes it keeps us safe. It allows us to plan. It allows us to book interviews, for example, you know,
right.
Past, present, future. It has many positive aspects, but it's about understanding that, you know, where is the ego's place? I think we live in a society where the ego has become the master, and I think we need to turn that around, that we are the masters, we have an ego, we have a mind, and we really need to pull that back and train ourselves, so to speak, so that we can have an enriched, fuller experience here with being personal, individual, as well as part of a greater consciousness.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I have a quote from your book, The Transcendent Mind, again, that I just want, it underlines what you just said. You say, not being aware of the ego intensifies the dichotomies that we experience and causes a hindrance to personal growth. But becoming aware of the ego enables us to recognize the dichotomies that are playing out in our lives. And again, Sunita, I love that you bring up this idea of dichotomies too, and that it's not about killing off the ego. I think that what's occurring in spiritual questing circles, if you will, is the idea that you've got to completely shut out the ego. And if you can't, then there's like this shaming that I've noticed people taking on of, well, now I'm being egotistical. Now my ego is in charge. And it's like, well, but sometimes, like you just said, that's a good thing. Sometimes it's important because we need it. We don't need it to survive anymore, but we need it for different ways of how we're going to show up in the world.
Yes, you're right, Susan. I think sometimes we forget to just stop and look at where we are, again, here and now.
Yeah.
Look at our surroundings, look at our experience, and it's not about, and you're quite right, with the ego, it isn't about we need to get rid of. It's about looking at who we are. I mean, seriously, Susan, I wonder whether you've actually had this experience. Have you ever actually tried to sit one time and get rid of all your thoughts and clear the ego? We think roughly 60,000 thoughts in a day, I'm told.
Oh my gosh,
now,
no.
60,000 thoughts a day. I would say to people that, generally speaking, I mean, the average population, that you will sit down and you cannot control what thought always comes into your mind unless you're focused, really focused, laser focused 24/7. And even then, you're still going to find that the odd thought may well creep in. So, the thing is, I don't think it's about controlling or getting rid of the ego. The fact is, the thoughts are going to come. They're going to come for numerous reasons,
Right.
But it's about becoming aware of, what am I thinking? Do I want to be thinking this? Can I make a different choice? And I think people often forget we are having a personal experience. Look at your surroundings, look at the challenges that you're having, and then put it into context with that. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. Totally makes sense to me. And I have tried to sit and make my mind shut up, and it just won't. So
it's hard, isn't it?
It is a challenge, and I would actually say the people that claim that they can, I'm not quite sure about that. So in your book, you also were talking about dichotomies, which caught my attention. So can we speak a little bit about what are some of the dichotomies we experience as human beings?
Absolutely, yes. So I think there are two types of dichotomies generally that we tend to look at. First of all, we see dichotomy playing out in our experience around us. So, for example, we'll see night and day, up and down. So just for the listeners out there that aren't sure what a dichotomy is a polar opposite, a duality, sort of black-white, complete opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we see this playing out in our environment, and I think that's a massive clue to us, Susan. The environment gives us a massive clue about how duality or dichotomy work together, that there's a natural flow of night and day, of up and down, of, seasons, so winter and summer coming into play. There's a natural circle that sort of happens in life, Now, when we look at that and when we bring that towards ourselves and when we translate that to ourselves as individuals, we see dichotomies playing out too. We see, for example, all of us have a light side and we have a dark side or a shadow side, And again, it doesn't matter how much we try to get rid of the dark side, the dark and the light put together actually is what makes us wholesome. So it's not about getting rid of the dark side or the negative side. It's about incorporating it, bringing it into the light, exploring it. What is it there to teach us? Why is it there?
Yes.
So we see it playing out like that. Another example of where we would see a dichotomy playing out would be looking at the idea that we have a natural authenticity within us, so we're born with natural skills, natural talents, natural desires, and quite often we're born into a society that teaches us, or education will teach us to sometimes, numb out that part of us and to follow a sort of described route almost, so to speak, that follow the academic way and do it like this. And again, it's about balancing the two. It's about learning how to become authentic in the environment in which we're in, and you have the head voice and the heart voice again, two dichotomies, the voice of reason, logic, but then you also have the voice of the heart, and again, you need both of them to live a wholesome life on this particular planet.
And I totally agree with you. And that's been my personal journey, is moving from the head to the heart and listening more to the heart voice, but allowing the head voice to have a little bit of discernment, but not relying on what my head thinks. Exactly.
So it's balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
It really is balance. I mean, like we're saying with night and day, when the night comes, we don't say to the night, well, you need to go. So we can just have just day. It's about knowing that, okay, yeah, there's a place for you. Just like that, there's a place for the mind. There's a place for it. It's just knowing where it fits and getting it to work for you.
Yeah, and Sunita, there was something else that caught my attention. This particular quote that I want to read right now. In the Transcendent Mind, you say that deep down, you believe that we are all naturally wired to express love. This is talking about the heart voice to me. We are all naturally wired to express love. It is important to recognize that natural does not necessarily mean normal. Natural is what we have been designed to do, whereas normal is what we get into the habit of doing. And I love that you said that, because I think that from my personal journey, I've really come to a sense that we're just here to be love and to be loving and to be kind. And that is a natural way of being. It's not the normal way that people show up, oh boy, but it is the way that we are wired. I believe that.
Yeah, I believe that too. And I tend to look, I think a lot of my work, Susan, has been from just observing, having a real deep observation of where I am, regardless of what I might be going through in life, looking at nature, looking at our environment and contemplating, well, where are the clues? What is it that tells us who we really are? So it's not just about reading and the research and the books. It's also about really tapping into where we are right now. And one of the things, one of the most obvious things that I've come across is that, well, if you just look at our bodies, when we are in a state of stress, when we are in a state of, unease, so to speak, the impact it has on our body isn't very good. We know that there's a common link now between stress and diseases, for example. So that is a massive clue in itself that we are not hardwired. Our bodies are not hardwired to run on stress all the time. Again, does that mean that life will have no stress? No, it doesn't mean that. You're having, again, a human experience. You will have all sorts of emotions, but it's about learning how to manage them. So, but it's looking for the little clues of, that is true. Our body does not function very well on fear. It's about looking at, well, when a natural disaster strikes, for example, you don't find, that's the one time sometimes that you will find that color, creed, sex, religion, everything goes out the window, and suddenly there's a huge calamity, and everybody's just goes into this mode of, what can I do to help? Because for that moment, we all recognize what it is to be human again. That one transcendent mind that connects us all, the voice of love, the voice of compassion, the voice of, empathy, that really comes to the surface. And I would say that our true natures really, really shine out at times like that.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I'm talking to Sunita Pattani, the author of The Transcendent Mind, The Missing Piece, PEACE, in Emotional Wellbeing. You're listening to Living Your Inspired Life. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Hi, this is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village.
You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you.
Welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. I'm Susan Burrell, and I have a couple of community announcements about events that are coming up in the Ventura, Santa Barbara County areas. The first one I want to tell everybody about is on the weekend of April 23rd through the 26th. It's a 4-day inner engineering, and it's a Kriya experience. So you're going to be learning tools for meditation and inner shift. And this is going to be up at the Center of the Heart in Santa Barbara. And to find out more about it, you can contact the website Santa Barbara at ishausa.org, or the phone number is 805-964-4861. Again, it's going to be April 23rd through the 26th. If you want to get some tools and a method to really transform your life and get more joy and inspiration into it, I highly invite you to do this weekend. It is going to be awesome. And the other thing is up in Ojai, my place of living, at the Ojai Art Center on April 25th at 7 p.m. There's going to be 2 films that are being shown. One is a short called Sea Fever. These are amazing films about surfing. But the second one is called Beyond the Surface, and it's about a handful of women that have traversed the world, and they've done surfing, and they're really looking for hope for our planet. And the photography in it is supposed to be awesome. And then afterwards, there's going to be a Q&A with the filmmakers. Again, that's at the Ojai Art Center, April 25th at 7 p.m. And the movie is called Beyond the Surface. And then the last thing I want to tell you guys about, because I love to support local service groups, is the Channel Islands Lions Club. They're having a fundraising event on Sunday, April 26th. And that starts at 4 p.m. It is called Casino Night. So those of you that don't want to schlep to Chumash or Vegas, come to the Lions Club Casino Night. For more information, you can call 805-205-0829. And again, that's April 26th, starting at 4, and the gaming happens from 6 to 9. Highly invite you to come and attend and support this local group that does amazing service work in our community. So that's all I wanted to say about these fabulous things that are happening in the next weekend. So I want to let everybody know I am having a conversation with the author of The Transcendent Mind, The Missing Piece in Emotional Wellbeing, Sunita Pattani. And so, Sunita, thanks for rejoining with me. And I want to talk now. I want to dip into the emotional wounding and healing that you describe in your book and how we go about doing that.
Wow, that's a big question.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, do you want me to chunk it down?
No, it's okay. We'll see how we get on. If I miss anything, just feel free to stop me and just ask away. So what I tend to say with healing, Susan, is that there are 4 elements that I have outlined in the book. Now, these 4 elements are, first of all, understanding emotional wounding, because I always tend to say to people that, look, understand, first of all, what it is, how you function, where the wounding is coming from, okay? And this is really the first step of to healing, I believe, anyway.
Well, and by emotional wounding, you don't just mean that, somebody called you a bad name and now you feel bad about it.
It could be that, but it could also be a lot deeper than that. So emotional wounding, for me, is really the idea of experiences that we've had over time, And again, sometimes it may just be, sometimes it's a severe trauma that's happened and it's left quite a big wound within somebody. It's like the energy gets trapped within. Because I believe that at the core we are all energetic beings, that actually when you look at us as humans, and if you look at what we're made up of, when you go deeper and deeper and deeper past the atoms and the subatoms, and when you go right deep down, I believe that we're energetic fields. So when we have a trauma, I do believe that there's a shift in our energy and how we absorb that trauma. So that can either be in a singular hit, or it could be just gradually over time as life happens, and if we're not very aware of what's going on around us and how to deal with our emotions, things can just build up, top, and you end up with emotional wounds that actually determine a lot of how you go and live life. Making sense?
Yes, it does. And one of the things you said in your book is that sometimes that trapped emotional energy can be passed down through generations.
Yes, this is fascinating, actually.
Yes.
This is actually the work of a good friend of mine, Richard Fluke, absolutely amazing. And he talks about the idea of a trauma, like I'm saying, energy getting trapped. Now, just to let you know, what usually happens is that the energy usually, first of all, gets trapped in the heart. Then this energy or emotion is then sort of communicated to the gut, and this is really where it stays, where it lodges. And then it goes into the brain, and then from the brain, it's actually sort of related to specific organs. So, for example, there are some people out there who can actually read a brain scan, look at a brain scan, and actually tell you your history of diseases that you've had. Absolutely fascinating.
Wow.
And then taking that one step further, that now if you imagine, if you've had a trauma, Susan, that trauma is trapped in your body. Now, if you have children, obviously your children are going to have, DNA that's going to have come down from you. So that energy may well actually be passed down in generations. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let's say, for example, you have a grandfather who was in a world war and experienced a famine, and all of this trauma is sort of trapped up, in his energy field. And let's say a couple of generations down, say his grandchildren, they may well be carrying that traumatic energy, but it might be dormant. Okay, so it's not necessary that it's going to play out. And then the grandchild themselves has an issue or something that occurs, and it's as if the dormant energy opens up. It's like a switch goes on. And you might find that might trigger off, for example, overeating in somebody, or binge eating disorder or something. So it's really fascinating looking at how the trapped energy sort of works and how it can actually come down generations. So, yeah, you're right.
Well, and it caught my attention because I have personally experienced that, and I think there's lots of people out there in terms of low self-esteem, and I can track how it was passed down from generations in my personal family. And so as I was doing my work, I made a choice to really get as healed up within myself about my esteem, my personal self-love and acceptance, so that I don't hand that down to my son or the next generations. It's like the buck stops here. It stops with me.
Yeah, exactly. It's healing that energy, isn't it? And it's healing it's making peace with whatever it is within, so that we're breaking the cycle of what's been sort of carrying on down the generations.
Yeah. And that's true for whatever the personal experience is that we've had in terms of an emotional wounding. Is just like you're saying, just to get clear. So then how does what is emotional healing then? Is it opening up that the heart energy? I
believe so. I think emotional healing, really, like we said at the beginning of the show, that emotional healing is really looking at a deep shift in perception, Susan. So yes, that can take on different forms, such as opening up more of the heart energy. It's the only way I can describe it, and I'm quite sure you'll probably resonate with this, that it's like a softening of energy. It's like when you're carrying around emotional wounds, that the way you look at yourself may well be negative. The way that you sometimes look at other people may well be negative. And as you begin to heal, and I talk about the healing process in the book in quite deep, in quite a lot of detail. As you begin to heal, it's like your energy sort of softens. You're nicer to yourself. You're nicer to other people. Again, you touch elements of the transcendent mind. You become a little bit more compassionate, empathetic, more loving. You know, that is what I would say that emotional healing is. It's a gradual opening of the heart. But you see, Susan, in the book, I talk about two different types of healings in there. I split them up and I say, you know, there are two types of healing. The first one is a specific healing. Now, a specific healing is for a specific issue or issues. So, for example, if I have people coming into my practice with, let's say, eating disorders or severe depression. So with eating disorders, that you are going to require, in certain cases, a specific skill set to be able to deal with the eating disorder. Am I making sense with what I'm saying?
Right. You have to develop a specific skill set.
Yeah. So, for example, if I had somebody who came in with an eating disorder, I wouldn't start straight with the Transcendent Mind, because their issues at the moment, you know, the issues at the forefront are very pressing. They're having difficulty dealing with the eating pattern. They're very specific issues. So we have to look at specific skills that they have to learn in order to begin to heal, first of all, the behavior that's happening, you know?
Right.
Right. So that's what I would call a specific healing. Now, a deeper healing, I believe that everybody is experiencing to some degree. Some people are doing it very slowly. Other people, you know, it's slightly quicker if they're working on themselves. And I believe this is why the older we get, the more wiser some of us become. You know, there's an element of wisdom that comes in through experiencing and opening of the heart. And this is what I believe a deeper healing is. It's a gradual opening of the heart. Now, there are some people, very few, that have instant enlightenment. It's like the heart opens and, you know, boom, they know what life is about. They have glimpses of the truth, so to speak. But generally speaking, I think most of us fit into sort of specific and deeper healing. So it's two different types of healings that I think occur with people.
Okay. And so then and oftentimes you're doing both at the same time, right?
Yes.
The specific
absolutely.
and the gradual, the deeper, so then what are some tools, if I wanted to begin my own emotional healing, what are some tools I would use?
Well, again, it really depends on there's a whole chapter in there that's sort of element 3 where we look at some of the tools. So the tools that I describe in there are mainly used for the deeper healing. Some of them would work for specific, but mainly for deeper. So the basic sort of thing, Susan, you're looking at is, first of all, are you actually willing and ready to change? That's the first thing.
Oh boy, that makes me uncomfortable.
You know, because quite often we say, you know what, yes, I'm ready to change, and then the deep stuff comes up, and we're like, oh, not quite sure if I'm ready to look at this.
Yeah.
You know, I don't, you know, which is fine as well. But one of the things that I say is, you know, when you become really open to looking at who you are and how to move forward, that's a tool within itself. You know. Another one of the tools that I talk about is exploring your authenticity, because really building your self-esteem and getting in touch with who you are. You know, I mean, who is Susan? What are her likes? What are her dislikes? You know, what are her natural traits? What makes her heart sing? Really coming down to earthing back to who you are as an individual, getting in touch with your individual nature. You know, that's another tool. And then, of course, we have one of my favorite tools, actually, forgiveness. Absolutely love this tool. You know, I do actually think it is the king of all tools, let's say, or the queen of all tools, you know. And that, I think, forgiveness, beginning to get your head around the idea of forgiveness, you know, why we hold resentment, what it's doing to us on the inside, and ultimately, actually the person that we are needing to forgive, you know, the forgiveness is going to benefit us just as much as it's going to benefit everybody else. So forgiveness, I think, is a huge, huge tool that needs a lot of work.
I absolutely, from personal experience, agree with you. And I have another quote from your book, The Transcendent Mind, Sunita, that I want to read, because you say, if we haven't learned to be compassionate and forgiving toward ourselves, then we may not be able to extend those qualities to another. In other words, if we have not owned up to and accepted our own darkness, then we will find it difficult to accept the dark side of another. And that is like the crux to me of forgiveness is the willingness to accept not only my darkness or my stuff, but then if I can accept it for myself, then it makes it easier for me to accept it or forgive it for somebody else who's, maybe I just can't. I can't.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Sometimes when I sort of observe people, sometimes, Susan, just generally, and you watch somebody really judging another person and they're really going for it. Mm-hmm. And I'll always look and I'll always think, how very interesting. I wonder if you're judging that person to this degree, I wonder how much you're judging yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think really this is something that I learned, again, very much through personal experience, that as I became, I'll tell you what, Susan, when I was going through my healing journey, I had always considered myself to be a really nice girl. Okay, she said, right?
Yeah.
Honestly. And then I started learning, when I really started looking at myself, and then I started talking to people, and a few people would say, actually, Sunita, when we first met you, you're really nice now, by the way, but when we first met you, we thought you were really arrogant.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, I didn't even see that, I was seriously thinking these things. And I think what I learned, having done quite a bit of work on myself, was looking back now, although I thought I was really nice on the inside, because I was really harsh with myself. I mean, my negative self-talk was terrible. That would often, when I would meet other people, my first judgment of them would be negative automatically, and I didn't even know I was doing it, And then as I started working on myself and accepting myself and my own darkness and being okay with it, automatically I was way more compassionate with other people. And now, I mean, Susan, I work with people who have sort of committed GBH, for example. I work with all sorts of interesting cases, and that is an interesting case within itself, because you look at somebody and you think, okay, it's a behavior that you've committed, but if you're really willing to change, then technically the forgiveness is within us as a society to say, yes, you've done wrong, but you've served your time or whatever, and now it's time to move forward, really.
Yeah, that seems to be in my observation and my inner sense, for lack of a better descriptor. That seems to be where we need to head to. It's certainly, if we can get to places where we can forgive in those larger spectrums, and then it will certainly serve the planet for developing a human rights. That's what's coming up for me as you're talking. For us to really respect and get that we're interconnected, we do have to go deep into places of forgiveness within ourselves first, and then for others. Otherwise, how can we have human rights exist unilaterally?
Absolutely. And I think that's the key, Susan, what you've said. I think quite often, when we talk about people who have committed what people would class as unspeakable crimes, for example, the first response, quite often, the common response is, what are you saying, Sunita? Are you saying that we should just let these people out and, they're not good in society? And I'll say, look, I'm not saying that the behavior is acceptable, because it isn't. It's not. The behavior itself is terrible. It's wrong. But, and yes, the person should be, reprimanded or worked with, or however we choose to tackle the situation. But you're very right. The core of it comes down to us as individuals. And okay, the person out there may well have really committed a crime, but what is it actually bringing up within us? Where are we soft at any point, or are we completely harsh in judgment? So it's interesting to see what really comes up within us.
Yeah, and the place where we can become more, well, you said authentic, but I think it's even more receptive and vulnerable in a good way. The vulnerability through the act of forgiveness, because it takes it in forgiving. You really are opening yourself up. My what did you call it? The head voice would be telling me, watch out. If you forgive this person, they're going to come and, ding you again. But the heart, if I drop into that heart voice and allow myself the openness to be vulnerable, to be at least willing to change, like you're saying, Sunita, and willing to experience a transformation, I have to be vulnerable in the idea in my head that it might happen again. And so many people, maybe that's a survival instinct. Once you've been hurt, it's like, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be challenging and it can be hard. And, and every case is different. So it is about really discerning and listening to, what it is that your inner voice is saying, and being forgiving and yet having boundaries at the same time. We're coming back to the dichotomy again, really, aren't we,
Yes,
Susan?
we are.
It doesn't matter how you sort of look at life. Life seems to be one big sort of paradox and one big dichotomy. And it's just about learning the balance. How do we actually create the balance in life to live more often, have more of an enriched experience?
Well, one of the things you talk about in the emotional healing section of your book is about intention and allowing. Can we speak just a little bit about that as we're getting close to the end of our time?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'll very briefly just sort of, again, this is in the emotional healing part, you're right. And there are 4 phases that I talk about, when it comes to emotional healing. So, and I say, the first stage is the stage of kind of exploration. So it's really when you sit down and you start to really look at who you are, what you're doing, that sort of thing. How can we actually sort of move on,
Yeah.
And then we tend to have this phase where, there's this phase of, in the first phase, we also do the intention. We set the intention for what it is that we want to create and where it is that we want to go healing-wise. And then the second phase, we really look at sort of being, relaxing, and allowing. This is really where we've got to go out there, live life whilst we're working, again, a dichotomy, whilst we're working on ourselves, and just allow the healing process to happen. And again, this is what I think it comes down to. Susan, I don't think consciously we do all of our healing. I am really of the opinion, I believe in a higher being, and I am of the opinion that healing, how we talk about co-creation?
Yes.
I think it's co-healing as well,
Huh.
That's how I feel that, okay, we set the intention, but then we allow, and the healing process takes place in us. I mean, really, Susan, can you tell me within your own journey how you have managed to do all that clearing? Can we put our finger on it? Quite often not. It's happened over time. We haven't noticed it happening, but it happens day by day, week by week, month by month,
Exactly. And the allowing, or what I call surrendering it, laying it all down, gives access to the higher consciousness to come in and do the work within me that I can't see or know needs to be done.
You got it. Yep. And then, absolutely. And then you have the third phase, which is when the healing happens. It can be gradual or it could be instantaneous. Don't know. Everybody's different. Mm-hmm. And then you have to learn the fourth phase, which is really learning how to live the change, experience the change. And how do I actually now keep this momentum, stay in this place, of healing and continue to work on myself. And
I can see that that's a powerful ongoing process, living the change, because it's so easy to go back to the old behaviors or thought forms that we've had all our lives. And I currently, it's so funny that you said that, Sunita, because currently I was noticing just over this weekend, wow, I have backtracked into a place that I no longer choose to live from. And I need to get back into the where I am living from, which is that place of open-heartedness and vulnerability and love, and not in the place of being shut down or whatever it is, and the living the change is walking the talk, huh? It is, and that's the hard bit, really. It's just really keeping your eye on the ball and just really tapping into yourself often enough to make sure that you're happy and you're grounded and you're moving along nicely. Yeah. With the odd bump here and there. Now, Sunita, you have a website, yes? Yes. Can you tell everybody what it is? Yes, it's www.Sunita, that's Sunita, Pattani, PATTANI.com.
So if you want to get in touch with me, and also I'm on Facebook as well, so you might want to look me up on Facebook and Twitter, same name.
Okay.
And actually, Susan, I'm coming down to the US next Sunday, actually. I have some workshops that I'm running there around the Washington, D.C. area.
Oh, fabulous. And how long will you be there for people that are listening across the country?
I'm there for 2 weeks. I'll be in the D.C. area, but I'll be back in September in Seattle and Oregon, actually, again, teaching workshops on the Transcendent Mind, really explaining the idea of a deeper healing and how to access it.
Awesome. So, and your calendar is on your website, yes?
It is indeed, yes.
So, Sunita, when you come to Southern California, I'm knowing that that's going to happen at some point. Let's get back in contact and we'll have another conversation of where you've gone from this point.
Absolutely.
With the Transcendent Mind. So, Sunita Pattani, thank you so much for joining me. The book is called The Transcendent Mind, The Missing Piece in Emotional Wellbeing. And I'm telling you, everybody, you got to have some emotional well-being in your life. It is the balance and the paradox. So thank you for joining me. And I'm just going to end with, and so it is, namaste.